Okay, so the first thing we're going to dive into on a deck design is going to be deck joists, deck beam, and you'd say, well, why don't we look at the footings first? Well, we got to know how big your beams are and how far your joists span, how big your deck is to know how big your footings are. So let's dive into a little design here. No making fun of my drawing. It's pretty hard on this. Let's just say I'm not a professional architect as far as design goes. So let's see here. So here is my little attempt at a drawing here. So if you were to go down to and get a permit for a deck, most likely they're going to ask you to tell them where it goes. Where does it sit on the property? Okay, so for my little drawing here, I've got my house, I have a back door, and I have a kind of a, I don't know what you call this, little L-shaped deck or something like that. It's attached to the house and it's about 6 feet above the ground. And so the first thing we got to figure out is well, what kind of joists do we need and what kind of beams do we need? And once we figure out those, then we can figure out how many footings we need. I know I'm going to need footings in these 4 locations, but the question is do I need more than that? You know, how far is this beam going to span and pick up all of the load? So we've got a little design, okay, we know what we've got. We've got to figure out what are our joist sizes. So if we go back to this little drawing, we've got 13 feet. That's our farthest span. Right here we have an 8-foot span, so we're going to come from the house and we're going to span all the way over onto a beam that's here, and we're going to span onto a beam that's right here. So this is deck joist spans for common lumber species. So I just picked random numbers when I did my little drawing there. So we'll see what shows up. So here would be your spacing for your deck joists, and then this would be spacing for deck joists with a cantilever. So maybe you've got a beam and then you cantilever your joist over the top of it, and so you can cantilever a little bit. And we'll look at some drawings a little bit later that'll show you how much you can cantilever. So whatever your lumber species is, where I live, we use Doug fir larch a lot. And if I'm going to put a composite decking down, let's talk a little bit about the decking. So maybe you're just putting like 2x6s down and you're going to stain them. But nowadays, a lot of people use composite decking. Name brands would be like Trex, right? It's like a plastic type material, and it just weathers very well and has very little upkeep on it. Well, those usually will have specific requirements on what the span of the joists are. Okay, so if the span of the joists, usually they're going to tell you 12 to 16 inches max. I think on my deck I did 16 inches and it's worked out very well, and I did put composite decking down just for the lack of maintenance. So let's just say that we're going to go with 16-inch joists. We're going to use Doug fir, and I have to span 13 feet. Okay, so if I'm scroll down through here and I get into the Doug fir, I scroll through here. What's the first one? Looks like 2x10s. So I would need to use 2x10s at 13 foot 7 inches in order to make that span. So I know I can do it. So what that means is I don't have to add like a middle beam to pick up the load. It doesn't, if I was to go say, let's just say I want to use 2x6s. Okay, well if I use 2x6s, I can only span 8 foot 8. Okay, so if I go back to my drawing here, I would end up after 8 feet, I would have to put another beam in here. So maybe you got a bunch of 2x6s laying around the house. You need to go in and make this thing a little bigger, and you'd have to add, right here and right here, and then maybe right in here you'd have to add another beam right here, if that makes sense, because those 2x6s can only span 8 foot. So you'd pick up a load right here, you'd pick up a beam onto some footings, and then it would span the rest of the way. So you can see if you decided to use 2x6s or even 2x8s, the max span that they can go before they have to hit something that holds them up is that far. So for our purposes though, we know that we can go 13 feet 7 and our deck's 13 feet. We don't even have to do a cantilever. But let's talk about cantilever a little bit as well. If we go back to here, let's just say that we used those 2x8s, and the 2x8s can span 11 feet. If you come over, let's say 11 feet, and instead of putting your footings right here, let's put our footings right there and right here, okay? Now you can span across right here and then cantilever 2 feet. Now you can use 2x8s. So you can see how you can move the beam to kind of fit what you have for design. Well, that's actually a pretty good idea. We might want to do that as far as our deck design because 2x8s are cheaper than 2x10s. So let's back up there and let's say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually cantilever our deck in this particular spot. And we're going to use 2x8s. So if we come over here, we're going to use 2x8s, and they can span, so 2x8s can span 11 foot 1. So you see 2x8 with Doug fir can span 11.1 at 16 inches on center. So let's see, 2x8s at 16 inches on center. OC. Okay. And they can span, was it 11 foot 1 inch? All right. So now we know what we're using for our joists. And because we can span 11 foot 1, we can also use 2x8s right here, right? Because it's under 11 foot. We're spanning 8 feet. So we'll end up with a beam here. And then we'll end up with a beam right here. And we'll cantilever that particular portion. That'd probably be the cheapest route. So now we need to figure out our deck beam, right? So deck beams. So again, I'm in the Doug fir larch. And this is dimensional lumber. If you get into, let's say you just really don't want a bunch of footings. And so you want to use something that will span quite a ways. You can use glue lambs, timber lambs. You can go to the lumber yard and you can just say, hey, I need to span this far. What do you have? And a lot of times it'll be some type of glue lamb beam or something like that. But if you're trying to stick with dimensional lumber, you're going to the box hardware stores and you're just buying 2x10s or 2x12s or something like that, you can do it right off of this chart. And so we've got our joists. Now let's get our deck beam. So if I'm over here, I'm on Doug fir, and we know that our deck was 16 feet wide at the biggest point, right? And then I had that little 8-foot section. But at 16 feet, that is a long span for a beam. So let's just hop in here. Let's see. So we have deck joist span less than or equal to. So we were spanning, because we pulled back and are cantilevering our beam, it also now makes our joist span a little smaller. So now, instead of being 13 foot of a joist span, our joist is really spanning 11 feet. That's where its bearing point is hitting, which is great because what it's going to do is it's going to move us into this 12 foot. Otherwise, we would have had to jump up to this 14 foot for joist span, so it's less than or equal to. So if we were 13, we would have had to hop to the next one. So now that we're 11, we're underneath this 12-foot span. So if we come down here, and I'm just kind of looking at all of these. You know, I mean, the longest I can go if I had 3 2x12s down here at the bottom is 10 foot or 9 foot 10. Well, that doesn't get me 16 feet. So no matter what I do, I'm going to end up having to put in another footing in there somewhere. Well, half of that is 8 feet. So you can go with 3 2x10s. It looks like a 4x12. So which is kind of like a timber, 4x12 timber. That one will go 8 foot 10. A 4x10. I just don't see very much in here. It says 2 2x12s will get me 7 foot 6. And so then it's like, okay, I think I might be able to even cantilever the side a little bit, and I'll bet you I can get to 7'6" of a span. So I'm thinking 2 2x12s might be the cheapest route. If I want to be safe, I think I could go with the 3 2x12s. But I'm gonna, and for the sake of trying to save money, I'm gonna go with 2 2x12s, and I'm gonna know that I can span 7'6". So let's go back to our drawing. So for our deck beam, we have 2 each 2x12s. And we can span 7'6". So if I was to come off of here, I can't really, well, I can actually. So if you can imagine, if we were to move this footing in just a tinch, so we're going to put it, let's say we're going to move it right there, move this one in right here, and then we'll put one right in the center. So we got, even if we cantilevered 6 inches on the edges here, so we're going to run our beam, our 2 2x12s, so that would be your beam, right? In a straight line. And you would actually cantilever the sides of your beam as well. So we're cantilevering over the beam with our joists, and we're cantilevering just 6 inches, if that, just 6 inches, because that's going to take you down to 15 feet. 15 feet cut in half is going to be 7'6". You should be able to just move your post on your footing in, move your footing in 6 inches right here and right over here. Okay, cool. So now we've got an idea. We've got our beam and we know where our footings go. We've got a footing here, we got a footing here, a footing here, 6 inches in, footing in the center, and then a footing right here, 6 inches in. So I think we've got our joists. Now we know that we're doing 2 2x12s for our beam, and now we just got to figure out posts. Okay, so now you can see this is the code on deck posts. So if you can see right here, deck post size and maximum height. I think we said our deck was 6 feet, so we could use a 4x4 or anything bigger than that. Now for my particular design, what I prefer to use is I prefer to use 6x6s, just minimum, no matter what. As far as setting your deck beam in there and attachments, to me, it's much stronger and much better. I have a hard time with decks that start getting up in height being in using 4x4s. They just seem like this, to me, they just don't seem beefy enough and be structurally sound. But you can use a 4x4 based on the chart that we have there. So I'm going to hop into footings here in a sec on the next video, but here's kind of a general idea on posts, joists, and the beam. So for our particular drawing, we're attaching to the house, so we can see we've attached to a house right here. Here's the primary structure, and we can either attach to the beam or we can go over the top of the posts and over the top of the beam. Well, since we're cantilevering, we need to do it this way. And you can see right here how they have cut and notched into the post to set their beam. That's why I would use a 6x6. It's because 2 2x12s is going to be 3 inches. Well, if you use a 4x4, well, there's no room in there. That's 3.5's 3.5. It would have to sit right on top. And to me, there's like a teeter point in there, right? You just have this beam sitting on top of a post. And to me, it just kind of moves too much. You can do it right here. You know, they have it sitting right there. I would prefer that if you were to do it, you'd use a 6x6 and you would notch it in, and then that way you have a good attachment point. So just to kind of sum up this particular part of the deck design, we had, in order to figure out what our footing sizes are, we had to figure out the design. And what we decided to go with was 2x8s at 16 inches on center, so that we have room, or we're close enough for any type of decking we decide to put down. We decided to cantilever it because our 2x8s can only span 11 foot 1. We also decided to cantilever our beam at each end on this long run by 6 inches because we can only span 7 foot 6. We're going to have a center footing and then these 2 footings on each end pulled in 6 inches, and then we got 2 footings over here to pick up this side of the deck. And then we're also going to use 6x6 for our posts. Like I said, I just feel like that's better. You could use a 4x4 based on the size, the fact that it's only 6 feet off the ground. Okay, so that should cover everything as far as beam size, joist size, and post size for our deck that we're building. So in the next video, we're going to hop into footing size, and we'll dive through designing our footing as part of our deck build out.